in tune with Soren in the City on 1017 World FM.
Good morning, everyone, on a new edition of the Soren and the City show on World of Femme 11.7, a show aiming to educate you about multiculturalism in our city, present issues and events, as well as what's hot and spicy in our diverse community. But first, we have Shai-Rose Khosla. Shai-Rose has a very, very emotional story, and for those of you out there who actually struggle with fertility, Shai-Rose has a very, very interesting and powerful story to share with you. Shai-Rose, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Soren, for having me.
It's hard for me to actually describe what happened, so I'm just going to let you do it. But I know that we're also friends, so I know the story. But when you actually contacted me a couple of weeks ago to actually talk about this on the show, I found out a lot of details that I didn't know. So why don't you actually tell us what happened?
Okay, well, I decided to share my story because I want to help other people who are dealing with this. I think fertility, there's so much shame and guilt surrounding it that a lot of people don't talk about it. So when I was 18, I was diagnosed with a condition called polycystic ovarian syndrome. And right at that point, I felt like my life changed, and I knew I would have troubles staying at a healthy weight. I knew I would have trouble conceiving a child if I were lucky enough to get pregnant. I knew that my risks for diabetes type 2 and cardiovascular disease would be increased for life. So it was a very scary diagnosis. And until I met my now husband, Sam, I never thought I would get married because I didn't want to put anyone else through this and struggle with trying to have a family. When I met my husband in August 2010, it was truly love at first sight. I saw him and I wanted to marry him. And I disclosed it to him, I think within the first 2 weeks of us knowing each other, that I had polycystic ovarian syndrome, and if he wanted to have children, I may not be the right person for him. And he was 100% accepting, and we dated and we were engaged fairly quickly and then married within the year. So it was pretty fast, pretty quick. Once we were married, we started trying to have a family within the first couple of months. And I had spoken to my gynecologist at that point and started a fertility medication called Clomid. And if any you ladies have been on Clomid, or any men who have been affected by women on Clomid, you know that it's a pretty hard drug to take in. Anyways, with the Clomid, I had quite a few side effects. I had excessive sweating, hot flashes, I had terrible mood swings. While for the year that I was taking the Clomid on and off, my relationships at work broke down, my personal relationships broke down. It was very isolating because I couldn't be anywhere, and if for some reason the medication didn't help me to ovulate, it was depressing. If I ovulated and we got a negative pregnancy test, it was devastating. So it was a really hard struggle for my husband and I right off the bat, being newlyweds and then having these constant disappointments. And finally, we were referred to the fertility clinic, and we then met with our doctor, Dr. Motan, who is truly an important part of my life for forever. We met Dr. Motan, and he's like, oh yeah, we can get you pregnant, no problem, all this other stuff. All my testing came out fine. And so we started with artificial insemination. So it would be my husband's sperm. They'd purify it and get it as close to my follicle or egg as possible and hopefully be pregnant. So we went through a couple of IUIs. They call them intrauterine insemination. And unfortunately, neither of them worked. And finally, my husband had his sperm tested, and we discovered that our only option was IVF because my husband had sperm antibodies, which means my follicle or egg will attack his sperm no matter what because of these antibodies. So unfortunately, our only choice would then be IVF with them with ICSI, which means that they would have to inject the sperm right into the egg. So we took a break at that point.
So this is 2013 or 14?
This was 2012 at this point when we found out. And so we took a break. There's a lot of complications with IVF. You know, there's a higher risk of like miscarriage and there's so many different things. I mean, So we wanted to really think about it. It wasn't a decision we made lightly. We did quite a bit of research. We looked into our options for adoption, which financially we couldn't afford adoption, but we could afford IVF.
So you said at some point that it's more expensive to actually adopt than
Yeah, with the legal costs.
What's the
and
price?
stuff. To be honest, that research was done like 3 years ago, so things may have changed. But we just found that IVF was our most feasible option at that point.
So you went with that.
Yeah, so we went into it. So November 2012, we started the IVF process. And so I started all the medications, and we were able to go in for the retrieval in December. And fortunately, we were implanted with 2 embryos, and we were pregnant. So we found out we were pregnant while I was in Emerge because I was suffering complications of IVF called ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. So my belly had filled up with fluid, and I was quite sick. And so I had to be in hospital for a little while. So we found out in Emerge we were pregnant. And the ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome is worse when there's multiples. And so I knew right off the bat, I'm like, it's twins. We know it's twins.
So now for those of you out there who are listening and cannot see Shai, how tall are you?
I'm 5 foot.
So she's only 5 foot and she's expecting twins, right? At this point, 2012. Just so you get an idea of the future. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. And so once the ovarian hyperstimulation had cleared, which took about 6 weeks, I was able to return back to work, and it was confirmed we were having twins. And honestly, it was like truly like the happiest time in my life. I was so happy to be pregnant. I didn't care how uncomfortable it was. And I think most people know a pregnancy can be pretty uncomfortable, you know, the morning sickness and all that other stuff. And I embraced it. I loved it. I felt so amazing. And after we cleared the 3 months and the ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome was no longer an issue, you know, we started to share our pregnancy with family and friends and stuff. And it was, I'm
happened?
sorry.
Yeah.
So it was my New Year's, which is March 21st, and we went in for our anatomy ultrasound, and we found out we were expecting a boy and a girl. So twin A was a boy and twin B was a girl. And we were so excited because we were like, oh, great, $1 million family. We'll never have to go down this road again. It's going to be amazing. And we were so excited. And about 2 weeks after that, I was not feeling very good. And I was going for an extra ultrasound because I had called my doctor and we had met. And I was like, yeah, I'm just not feeling right, whatnot. So they got me in for an ultrasound. And I was actually going to go to the ultrasound myself, and for some reason Samir came and picked me up from work, and we went in for the ultrasound together, and the radiologist came in, so you always know that's not a good thing when the radiologist comes in to talk to you. And at that point I had no cervix left, which meant I was going to go into labor. There was nothing that could be done. So they told us to get to the hospital, and so we went, and they talked about some different options, but because it was multiple pregnancy, they couldn't do something called a cerclage where they can close the cervix with some stitches. There was pretty much no option left. So they put me on bed rest, and I was to lay in a position called Trendelenburg with my head down, feet up all the time, and hope that we can prolong the process and get the twins to a viable point so they could have a better chance to survive. And I think I was in hospital for 3 days, and I started active labor, and they couldn't stop the contractions. And so they moved me to the labor and delivery room. I remember it was April 9th. They moved me to the delivery room at 3 p.m. And and I knew, and being a nurse, like I knew there was no hope left, and everyone's giving me this lip service, oh, stay positive and all this stuff. And all you want to do is break down and cry. And I can't cry because that's too much pressure. And that could make my labor come on faster. So you're trying to not cry, not show any emotion, and you're trying to hope when you know there's no hope left, right? So my contractions started getting faster. And they said they could see the feet of twin A, which was the boy, already. And so they said there was nothing they could do. So they gave me an option, and they said we can deliver twin A in hopes that your cervix will close and you would still be pregnant with twin B. How do you make that decision? Like, how do you say that? Okay, induce my labor. I'll kill one child in hopes to save another. That's a difficult decision, which is a decision me and my husband couldn't make. And by the time we were ready to make a decision, it was too late. So twin A was coming, and my twin B was on the way as well. So there was nothing they could have done to stop it. And so we ended up delivering the babies, and it was 3:44 and 3:49 in the morning when they came. And I'm not sure if I'm more relieved or not that they were born still, or if I would have wanted to have a few moments with them. I'm not sure. I think it would have been harder for us to watch them die in our hands than to just hold them the way that they were. So yeah, it was a tough time. And we were really fortunate in the sense that my community was very supportive, and and our family tried to be as supportive as they could, but they were also grieving as well. And we had a funeral for our twins.
That was 3 days, 2 days later.
2 days later. 2 days later. I wanted it to be done really quick. I don't know what my rush was. I remember the date because it was April 12th, and before that, it was sunny, it was nice out, and I remember that morning it was so cold and so snowy, and there was something about as soon as their casket hit the ground, the sun started shining and stuff. And in that moment, I felt like I made the right decision for it to be done quickly. So I felt like it was a sign from God that they're back to where they belong. So, yeah. I'm sorry, I don't want to cry.
Oh, no, it's a powerful story. Now, what is the message that you want to send out there? I know you blamed yourself, and was there anything that you would have done differently?
Oh my gosh, I would have taken it easier. I would have valued my pregnancy more. When we got pregnant, we were living in a smaller condo downtown, and as excited as we were about twins, we're like, oh, we'll need a bigger house, and we'll need this, and we wanted to give our children the world. We wanted to give them everything we had and what we didn't have. And so every night we were out looking for a house. I was putting in extra hours at work, to get ready to be off because I was so excited, and I wish I would have just slowed down, rested, and we could have bought a house later. We could have done whatever later, and I just wish I would have taken that time, but in retrospect, I don't think anybody does anything differently. The second you find out you're pregnant, you dream of a life for these kids, right?
Yeah.
I was like, oh, it's going to be so hard for their first day of daycare and going back to work. And you think about, oh, their first day of school and when they get married and graduate, and you dream these lives for these little people that aren't even here yet. Yeah.
But
right?
This whole story actually has a happy ending. So yeah. What happened after that?
Well, after that, so I was really lucky. I got some time off work to take some time and get better. And my husband and I decided I want to start trying right away for another baby. And it was a hard decision for my husband too, because he was like, no, we're happy, you and me. And I really pushed the situation. And so 3 months after, we started back with the fertility clinic, and I have to give my doctor and the nurses and the staff there a big hat. They're amazing, and how supportive they were, especially when you're hopped up on hormones, a little crazy, totally grief stricken, so, and they had to deal with me for a year. So we started back 3 months later, and we had several attempts to doing a frozen embryo transfer, and unfortunately I was having some issues with my endometrial lining getting thick enough, and then we had 2 failed transfers, which were devastating. If I didn't have a supportive work environment where every time I'd find out the pregnancy test was negative, I could just leave and go home and cry and deal, and it just, I was fortunate in that sense. Not fortunate to have to deal with this, but fortunate that people understood that I needed my time. And then finally, we decided, I decided, and I fought with the physicians and everything, that I'm going to do a fresh transfer. We're just going to do the whole process again, and that got me pregnant the first time, so let's do it again and get pregnant a second time. And so we did, and we did it, and it was totally drama filled. So I was at risk of developing that ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome again, and they were saying, we'll do your extraction for all the follicles, and then we'll freeze them, and then we'll do frozen embryo transfer. And I lost it. I'm like, nope, they didn't work for me before. I'm not going down the road. This is why we spent all the money again. This is why we invested our emotions. We're going for fresh transfer. And I think if my physician was anyone but Dr. Motan, I think they wouldn't have allowed it. But he was amazing, and he worked with me, and the nurses there were very supportive as well. And we transferred 2 embryos again, and we were lucky to get pregnant, and it was a singleton pregnancy. And now we have a beautiful baby girl named Sophia, and she's going to be 5 months this week.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah.
Sharos, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. That's our time for this interview. You've been listening to Sharos Goslar with her powerful story. We'll take a little break right now. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back on Soren in the City.
You're in tune with Soren in the City on 1017 World FM.